Hello, my name is John Schneider. When I was a kid, I used to visit my Grandma Vi in the Jersey BAYSHORE area, and I'd take 8mm movies of my family and their friends. In fact, I was the family filmmaker. Today I live here, but traded my film camera for video, and recently shot this tugboat in the Shrewsbury River. Welcome to Jersey BAYSHORE country. Where is the Jersey BAYSHORE? Let's get oriented by starting with the big picture. It's somewhere in here, part of the universe, and definitely part of our world. But it's like no place I've ever experienced. And as soon as we land, I'll show you around. These are my family's home movies from the very early 60s of the famous Twin Lights of Navesink, which overlook Highlands, New Jersey, which is part of the New Jersey BAYSHORE. And this is the so-called $1 million bridge, which was such a big deal at the time. Since then, the bridge has been replaced with the Captain Joseph Azzolino Bridge. Here's a clip of the home movie showing the beginning of Sandy Hook, and here's that same view today, also from the Twin Lights. And just once more, here's Highlands in the very early 60s, and here's the front of the Twin Lights with an old anchor on the ground, which is still there today, except in a slightly different spot. The Twin Lights of Navesink are as impressive to me today as they were yesterday. In fact, it's the first place I take visitors who come to the area for the first time, and they are always amazed. With an elevation of some 200 feet above sea level and a great view and a rich history, the Twin Lights is really a symbol for the Jersey BAYSHORE and a National Historic Landmark. The present-day Twin Lights were constructed in 1862, but the original Twin Lights were constructed 30 years prior in 1828 at the request of the American shipping industry, which asked Congress to replace the Sandy Hook Lighthouse, which had become operational in 1764, and it was the only lighthouse at the time serving ships entering the entrance to New York Harbor. So, in 1828, sea captains were welcomed with 2 new beacons from the Twin Lights as they made their way into New York Harbor. The Twin Lights emanated from this spot high above the Navesink and Highlands and overlooked Sandy Hook. The name of the facility at the time was the Navesink Light Station, but everybody kept calling it the Twin Lights, and the name stuck. Let's go back to my home movies for a minute. This is a Fresnel lens, and in 1841, the very first Fresnel lenses in the United States were installed in these towers. These lenses at the Twin Lights created a scientific revolution in our country, which led to all kinds of things like checkout scanners and camera lenses and fiber optic cables, fairly significant stuff. Oh, incidentally, when you visit the Twin Lights, take a look at the so-called mystery cannon from the 17th century. It was actually found on the grounds during construction in 1861, and people are still wondering how the heck did it get there. While the South Tower is usually closed to the public, the North Tower is open for climbing to the top. And from there, the views are even more spectacular, from New York City to Long Island to the ships in the Atlantic Ocean moving in and out of New York Harbor. You can also see the ferry, which shuttles back and forth between this area and New York. It's a very cool place to visit. The grounds around the Twin Lights are perfect for picnics or just sitting on a bench or under a tree to contemplate life. And don't forget to visit the museum, as well as the electric power station, which is located outside the main building. Incidentally, the Twin Lights was actually the first primary seacoast light in America to use electricity. And while the Twin Lights no longer serve as a navigational aid to ships, one of the towers flashes a light as a reminder of what once was critically important to our defense and to our economy. The Twin Lights is a landmark in the area, and one that almost everybody sees as they cross the Captain Joseph Azzolino Bridge to Sandy Hook and then back again. And while the twins are more than 150 years old, they really are youngsters compared to a distant ancestor which has made its home for more than 250 years on the now historic and decommissioned Fort Hancock, located near the tip of Sandy Hook. Built in 1764, almost 100 years before the famous Twin Lights of Navesink was built, the Sandy Hook Lighthouse is the oldest continually operating lighthouse in America. And if you haven't seen it, you need to see it. And during 2014, it celebrates its 250th year anniversary, and so it got a fresh coat of white paint to welcome visitors who are going to be celebrating the occasion. Sandy Hook, while looking a little like a peninsula, is technically called a spit, like a spit in a bucket. It was discovered by Henry Hudson in the 1600s, about 100 or so years before the lighthouse was built. And getting to Sandy Hook couldn't be easier. You just take the Garden State Parkway to exit 117. You jump on Route 36 headed towards Sandy Hook. It takes about 20 minutes from the Garden State Parkway. You'll cross the bridge over the Shrewsbury River, and there you are. This is a national park with more than 2,000 acres, about 7.5 miles of sandy beaches, 10 of them in fact, and of course the historic Sandy Hook Lighthouse is located in historic Fort Hancock, which was originally built about 1896. And next to the lighthouse is the Lightkeeper's House, which is also a museum and a gift shop. So today, here's a view of New York City from the top of the lighthouse. And here's a view of the lighthouse from the tip of Sandy Hook. Interestingly, when the lighthouse was first built, it was located only 500 feet from the tip of Sandy Hook. So this line indicates where the beach was located before Mother Nature and constant tidal changes put more land around the base. So that today, the lighthouse is about 1.5 miles from the tip of Sandy Hook, not 500 feet. We're standing right now where you saw that line and where the coast used to be. And look how close we are to the lighthouse. So while the workers are putting on some fresh touches of white paint on the old lighthouse, let's sneak up, take a look from the very top, and we've got a little more than 100 steps to climb. So while we climb, I'm going to describe the lighthouse's history. So you probably already know that the light was built to aid mariners entering the southern end of New York Harbor. In fact, it was originally called New York Lighthouse because it was funded through a New York Assembly lottery as well as a tax on all ships entering the port of New York. It's amazing that this lighthouse has endured all these years, even after an occupation by British troops during the Revolutionary War. Incidentally, a curious bit of trivia while we're climbing. The Sandy Hook Lighthouse was filmed as a fictional backdrop for the final episode of the longest-running soap opera on television. Can you guess what it is? Guiding Light. So back to real history. About 12 years after the lighthouse was built, the British fleet arrived off Sandy Hook, and some sympathizers with the British cause, mainly from Monmouth County, and they were called Loyalists, fled to Sandy Hook through highlands to help the British build fortifications which were held for the rest of the Revolutionary War. 2 years later, the celebrated Battle of Monmouth Courthouse between Sir Henry Clinton and General Washington took place, and pretty soon the British troops fled to Sandy Hook, where they waited for their fleet to take them to New York City. Some 17 years after the lighthouse was built, and even after the British surrendered in Yorktown, the Loyalists stayed in control of Sandy Hook. Eventually, they sought refuge in New York City, which was still occupied by the British. And about a year later, Patriots and Captain Joshua Huddy was hanged in Highlands, which was right across the bay. 1 year later, in 1783, the American Revolution ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. Okay, so here we are at the top of the lighthouse, and the view is spectacular. Look at this. Isn't this great? And this big fella right here, this is a Fresnel lens, which has two 1,000 watt bulbs inside of it. And see, these are up here. These are cameras. They're installing these for the 250th celebration. These are going to be webcams that look out over the ocean and look out over the bay, and you can dial them up on your computer. Isn't that cool? And you see that wall down there that looks like a bunch of steps? That's a wall that was designed to protect an artillery battery, and you can learn all about it in the Lightkeeper's house and museum downstairs, which I heartily endorse you visit. We're actually in the Lightkeeper's house. This is a replica of the mortar battery, which we saw it from the top of the lighthouse. So we're going to walk over and take a look. You see how close it is to the lighthouse? There are so many things that you can look at, so many old structures all over Sandy Hook just waiting for you to explore. Let's just look around a little bit. And you see these openings? Well, they're sniper windows. So if the enemy got close enough to the artillery battery and decided to climb the wall, the snipers would be ready to cut them down as soon as they jumped down. Pretty ingenious, right? Thankfully, they were never used. Now let's take a walk away from the lighthouse and toward the tip of Sandy Hook. Not a lot of people have been out there because it takes so long to get there. Remember that the original coastline was about 500 feet from the base of the lighthouse, so that's right in this particular area where we're walking. We still have to walk about 1.5 miles to get to the very tip of Sandy Hook, which, remember, was completely underwater 250 years ago. Incidentally, while we're walking, I just want to explain that the Sandy Hook Lighthouse is part of the Sandy Hook unit of Gateway National Recreation Area, which is administered by the National Park Service. And it's open 7 days a week, and National Park Service park rangers offer free tours every half hour from 1 o'clock in the afternoon until about 4:30 in the afternoon. As we get closer to the tip of Sandy Hook, it starts feeling more like a desert. Scrub bushes and all kinds of sand and stuff. So make sure you bring plenty of water and sunscreen and the appropriate shoes. Why don't we just listen to the sound of nature for a while? Well, that's an American oyster catcher with the colorful orange beak. Okay, here we are. This is the very tip of Sandy Hook, stretching out into Raritan Bay. Man, oh man, what a beautiful sight. You've got to come out here and just hang out and look at it. You can fish, you can picnic, you can swim. If you got a boat, that's a nice way to get here. I do it very often. And look, there's the Sandy Hook Lighthouse one more time, 1.5 miles away, and all of this where we are standing was underwater. My time sure does change things, doesn't it? So for more information, you can visit the Gateway National Recreation Area website, or you can visit jerseybayshore.com. Next, we're going to talk to Bob Mayers, who's an author and an expert on the Revolutionary War and lives here in Highlands right next to Sandy Hook. And he's going to talk to us about the day the British went through Highlands, went over to Sandy Hook, took control of it, and then escaped to New York City.
Hi, my name is Bob Mayers. I'm a writer and a historian. The thing that interests me about Highlands is not what interests most people. I am most interested in the Revolutionary War period and what happened here. In 1778 was the Battle of Monmouth, and Washington, the entire Continental Army, met and fought the entire British Army over here in Freehold. It was one of the biggest battles of the war and ended up as a draw. Neither side was really the victor. And during the night, the British pulled out their troops, and they wanted to get them over to New York City. But their troops included 16,000 people, including soldiers, camp followers, cannon, horses, wagons, and a wagon train that was 1.5 miles long. And they started out from Freehold heading to the Highlands, and you can trace their route today. It looks very much the same as it did in those days. And when you hit Route 35, you pick up King's Highway, which takes you into the village of Navesink. And I read an account written by a British officer. He describes the village of Navesink. And if you go there today, it's the same, looks exactly the same. They camp in various places. It takes them a couple of days to get over here. General Henry Clinton and General Howe send ahead their chief engineer to survey what the place looks like. And he says, well, you know, you get to a place called Middletown and the ground rises. You know, if Washington comes after us, we ought to take up our position there and fight him from those hills, the rise of the hills at Middletown. So his chief engineer comes over here and says, Sandy Hook is an island. It's not attached to the mainland. We have to build a pontoon bridge. Now, the part that goes by bars now was not a big river channel. It was a swamp. And the British engineers built a small pontoon bridge to get over that swamp to get to Sandy Hook. So all 16,000 people trooped through our town. They say they left from Gravelly Point, but I'm not sure it's the Gravelly Point street today, or Gravelly Point covered maybe hundreds of yards along the shoreline there, but that's where they left, and they all got over. And now, historians decry the fact that Washington did not pursue them. If he had gotten over here, he could have mounted his cannons on the heights of the Navesink, trained them down on Sandy Hook, the entrance at Sandy Hook, not all the way down because that's 7 miles long. The guns didn't have that range, but he could have caught the British Army on Sandy Hook. The ships weren't there yet, and they were stranded on this narrow strip of land, but Washington did not do it. He went into New Brunswick. Now, as the British troops are waiting for the ships out here, they're all stationed camping on Sandy Hook, and they hear gunfire, and they say, my God, the Americans are coming after us. Well, they weren't. They were firing guns to celebrate the 4th of July in New Brunswick, and the breeze carried the sound of the cannon all the way to Sandy Hook, and the British thought they were being pursued. Anyway, there were like probably 100 ships and sloops, and it took the British 4 or 5 days to board all their horses and cannon. Off they went to New York City, where they stayed for the rest of the war.
Finally on the program, we're going to talk to Tom Hoffman, who is the historian for Sandy Hook and works with the National Park Service.
The British controlled the harbor, and the metropolitan area was under British control. The British had a lot of warships, and a lot of transport cargo ships. You need to supply them. So they needed a big fleet to supply the Army operating here in New York City and New Jersey. So they need the lighthouse as a guide in and out of the harbor at all times. It's American forces who tried to destroy the lighthouse. During the Revolution, there were several raids here. One of the first, in fact, the first where they tried to actually destroy it with cannon was June 21st, 1776, where early in the morning they tried to sneak up and discover that the British were here first. There's some British warships that sent ashore an armed guard who fought off the Americans. But according to Benjamin Tupper, the colonel leading the raid, he reported to George Washington, he said that we bombarded the tower for over an hour but couldn't make no impression upon its walls. You go back to the 1700s, there's 13 colonies owned by England, and the colonists built their own lighthouses for commercial reasons. It's usually merchants who needed the ships to be safely guided into a harbor so that the ship arrived safely with a cargo. The cargo is worth money. So they want that ship to arrive at a dock or a wharf, like up in New York City, safely. And the colonists didn't build many lighthouses. By the time the Revolution starts in 1775, there's only 11 lighthouses spread out in the 13 colonies. The first was Boston Lighthouse. Second one was built on Nantucket Island. Third one at the entrance to Narragansett Bay, which was Rhode Island. Fourth was in Connecticut, New London, Connecticut. And number 5 was Sandy Hook. And it's built here because Sandy Hook juts right out into lower New York Harbor where the ocean meets the harbor. So ships then as now have to, as they sail in, pass right by Sandy Hook. So Sandy Hook is low and flat. Even on a nice clear day, you really don't see Sandy Hook. But you put a lighthouse on this low flat beach, painted a high visibility color, which is white, and ships will look over here, and even on a clear day, they'll see a white tower. And that tells them, hey, that's Sandy Hook is over there, and you have to stay away from it. You don't want to sail into shallow water and get shipwrecked. Out of the 11 lighthouses built, as time goes by, only one still stands, and it's the Sandy Hook Lighthouse. It was constructed very well. A man by the name of Isaac Conroe, who lived in New York City, who built buildings as a living and sold building materials. I mean, he was the Home Depot guy of his day. Lived in Lower Manhattan. He was hired by the merchants of New York to build the lighthouse. His workforce did a very good job. And then, after it's built, people take care of it, and those people were keepers. As the tip grew further and further out to the north, the government was afraid that ships they'd see the Sandy Hook light, but they might turn too quickly and go into this newer tip. So the government would build a small beacon, which is a small lighthouse, out on the tip of the hook, so that marked the actual tip for ships. That eventually got called the North Hook Beacon. And over on the bay side for ships coming from the west, like from the port of Perth Amboy, from the city of Perth Amboy, you had ships would line up on the west beacon, which stood right on the bayshore, and line up on the small west beacon, but directly behind it was the Sandy Hook Lighthouse. So if you got both in line, you were in the channel headed towards Sandy Hook. So there were 2 other small lighthouses called beacons, West Beacon, North Hook Beacon. Mariners still want to see something because your electronic systems, especially GPS, they're electronical and they might go down on you. It's just like having a power outage out here and having no electricity to light the light. Well, for that, they have a backup generator to create electricity to keep the light on. But when you're on a ship, you still want to see where things are. And these still serve as markers. In fact, lighthouses' color schemes are called day marks. So ships still want to see something. There's been just a couple of digs. We had an archaeologist dig right next to the west side of the foundation, and he went down a good 3 feet. When I walked up to him, he kind of like popped up out of his test square, as they call them, and he says, Tom, I'm standing on the Revolution. And I said, oh, you mean the surface, the actual ground surface of the Revolution is like 3 foot down? He says, yeah, if not more. It was somewhere between 3 and 4 feet down under the present surface. He found a child's toy. They could turn a coin. They could cut a coin and make it a buzzer, to make buzzer sounds. And he found a coin from the colonial era that had become a children's toy. He found a musket ball, because it is the local loyalists who were organized by the British Army to serve in loyalist regiments, and loyalists were used to guard the lighthouse, and they in fact turned it into a fort during the American Revolution. So there was that one dig, and that same archaeologist was hired again by the Park Service, because he's a contractor archaeologist. He doesn't work for the Park Service. He found, when we had to put in a new water line to the keeper's house, he found artifacts in the ground, including a button, which he said, it says USLHE. He says, does that mean it's United States Lighthouse Engineer? And I go, no, not engineer, establishment. So the old lighthouse service used to be called the United States Lighthouse Establishment, later service.
Well, that about wraps it up for another episode of Jersey Bayshore Country. I hope you'll join us next week when we have a whole new episode. And remember, you can always contact me at john-schneider@comcast.net to suggest story ideas or ask questions. And as always, we have a radio show every Sunday night at 8 o'clock called Jersey Bayshore Talk Radio, and I hope you'll join us there as well. And again, thanks so much for watching. I sure do appreciate it. Bye-bye, everybody.